How's everybody tonight? Everybody good? Good to see you all. You won't need your cell phones or your computers for Mr. Snyder's presentation here, so if you shut those off, that'd be great. Our presenter this evening, Career Compass Program, is happy to have Martin Snyder here with us. Martin is a 95 graduate of Cornell University in computer sciences. He is Vice President of Engineering for Pinnacle 21 Certara, am I saying that correctly? Which is a drug discovery and development company. Let me read a little bit about him. Once again, I'm not familiar with your field, but I'll go ahead and read this. Mr. Snyder is also an active member of the technology community as an organizer and frequent presenter of regional conferences and events, serving as a leader of the Philadelphia Java User Group for 3 years and co-leader of the Philadelphia Area Scala Enthusiasts for 4 years. He has served on the programming committee for multi-day conferences, including Philly ETE and Northeast Scala Symposium, and his presentation credits include BoxWorks, Liberty.js, Philly Jug, Philly ETE, and React Philly. So he's that Philadelphia guy here, right?
Love Philly.
Here nearby. So we're happy to have you with us, and I'll turn it over to you, Martin. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the kind introduction. Thank you all for coming. I know you guys have a lot of choices for which of these you attend. So I thought I'd start. I assume the draw for everyone tonight is the title. So like how many people chose this because they are looking at a career in management potentially? All right.
The subject is management and organizational design.
How about people that think they want to be entrepreneurs someday? All right, good. How about people that just they want to be an individual contributor and exploit the system? All right. Well, there's some smiles at least, but okay. Well, it turns out that the information is valuable no matter what your perspective is, right? And so that's like one thing to keep in mind when you talk about a topic like this. For the most part, everyone's going to be involved in some sort of organization, and you're going to be either conducting management or subject to management or both. And so, it's a topic that's it's challenging to talk about at the academic level, right? But it's just the kind of thing that you might want to, anything you can remember is helpful, even if it's just like to know to come back to this stuff at some point in the future. And then there's a couple of things like. We had to condense this to fit into the time frame. We could talk for hours on single bullet points and stuff. Usually leadership is part of this too, and we left like all the leadership stuff out of this presentation. So we might refer to it from time to time. And of course, I encourage questions during and after. I field questions on any topic whatsoever, even if it's nothing to do with this. And my personal experience has all been in software companies. But again, these sorts of things I try to present it in a way that it's generally applicable no matter where you end up. So we're going to talk about management first. And management is really simple. Of course, everything is simple if you ignore what makes it hard. But so it's setting expectations and giving feedback and communicating. Like those are the three things that you'll focus on as a manager. Now, expectations, it turns out, there's a lot to this. So if I'm looking at a personnel setting expectations with people who report to me or people in a team thing, you have to divide your expectations into three different groups, right? So you have behaviors, and behaviors are things that apply to everyone. So like you might have an expectation that you must be to a meeting on time, right? Or we will work in the office on Wednesdays or something like that. Or it could just be like, we're going to be polite to each other. Or if somebody sends you an email, you're going to reply. Like those are human behavior type things. And all expectations can either be implicit or explicit. But what you'll find when you're looking at successful management programs is everything is explicit. And that's why you end up with like weird handbooks sometimes that are saying like, oh, well, you have to do all these different things. And you're like, well, who wouldn't? And of course, every single bullet point on that list, they can probably attach a name to. Like this person made me write this bullet. And I'll remember their name for the rest of my career. And probably I can do that for every bullet in this, this presentation. So then you also have expectations based on seniority, right? So like I'm an entry level person and I type this fast, and my senior level people type twice as fast, and other people, like all across the thing. Or if you're, you're looking at like a convenience store or something, like almost any single skill you look at, you can do at different levels. And it usually correlates with years of experience, but not always. And sometimes there's different like gateways to get to different levels. Like you have to do an apprenticeship for 4 years before you're allowed to before you can, actually use the nail gun. You can only see the nail gun used. So seniority factors into a lot of expectations. And then you have tenure, right? So how long you've been with an organization is separate from how long you've been doing something. Sometimes it can be the same if you stay your whole career in one organization. But you can have things like, okay, well, you've been with the organization for 2 years, therefore now you're eligible to be part of my interview team. Like we're going to value your input because you'll be able to present the organization well and answer questions for candidates or something like that. Or you'll be able to onboard new people because you've accumulated enough answers to the questions new people would ask or something like that. So the best systems for managing expectations will break into these three categories. And then you get a couple, when we talk about, especially behavioral expectations, there are a couple words that will be thrown around a lot. So core values, I think a lot of companies they're all talking about their core values. If you search like any company name, you'll come right to like slide 2 on most of their presentations. What core values are supposed to be is they're supposed to be a very small list of behaviors which are mandatory. Like, if you don't have this, we will not hire you. If you don't exhibit this in the workplace, we will fire you on the spot. Like that important, like core value. Like this is how we will behave ahead of anything else. And like some people as hiring managers will have core values that they value. So for me, like the 2 things that I look for in all candidates are energy and curiosity. And that's part of why I do so much work with early career programs. Is because I think like when you're looking at like college students or career changers or a lot of like early career things, that's plentiful. Like those are things that a lot of people have, and those are huge assets when you're learning a lot. And so it's something that I believe in personally. But our organization has slightly different core values, although one of them is bring positive energy for Pinnacle 21. And then when you get to larger organizations, it becomes tougher because like you can't like have core values for a 50,000 person organization because some people won't be meeting those things. And so what you'll start to see, a word to think about when you're talking about values or expectations or goals or any of these things is aspirational. You might see some of these things out there and like, sure, they say that, but they don't live up to it, but they would love to. They would love to be able to live up to it, and maybe you can help them. And it's something, so when you're looking at an organization, right, when you're establishing your own core values, you do not want them to be aspirational. But when you're evaluating a company and they're telling you the core values, you might want to ask targeted questions that will help you understand whether these are actually things they live by and are do or die type things, or whether these are things that they're aspiring to and they have like a lot of wiggle room. When you talk about behaviors and values and stuff, one of the things to bear in mind is these are things that are hard to change in someone. So like if one of your core values is responsiveness and you're interacting with a candidate and they don't respond very quickly, well, you're probably not going to be able to change that about them. Like you could hire them, you can give them negative reviews, but like that's kind of who they are. And so like that's the key thing with behaviors and values is that you can really only get what you want from a recruiting standpoint. It's very hard to get what you want through training or remediation or improvement or something like that. So when you're talking about the organizational design part, like understanding what your expectations are going to be is important in how you're going to construct your organization and what sort of people you're going to try to attract. The other things are more established. The seniority is more established by the industry. And the tenure is more established by like just how your organization grows over time, which a lot of times is outside of your personal control. So another thing that comes up a lot is culture, and you'll see a lot of great quotes on culture out there. This is my personal favorite, and it's absolutely true, is a company culture is defined by the worst behaviors the leaders are willing to tolerate. So you can say whatever you want, but if people show up to meetings 30 minutes late and nobody does anything about it, your culture is you're the company where nobody shows up to meetings on time. And so if you're in a position to shape the culture of an organization, you have to keep this in mind. And you have to think about what are your tools of accountability. right? And again, this gets to core value type thing. For is something so important to you that you would not hire someone over it, or you would fire an existing team member regardless of performance over this one thing? These are really important in deciding how you're going to shape. And this is how you end up with organizations that have these properties at scale. When you get like you walk into a company with 1,000 people and they all behave exactly like the one person that was your initial contact. And you're like, well, how do they find all these people? And it's like, well, it's hard work, but it's less about who they're finding and who they're not letting into the building. So super important when you're setting expectations to think in these terms of how far are you willing to go and which categories are your expectations in. Another way to think about expectations is goals, right? So this is like more of a short-term thing where it's like, hey, now we're at the start of the year and this is where we want to be at the end of the year as an organization. And then we want to kind of trickle those goals down to people on an individual basis. And so we can structure goals in very different ways. So there's three, I mean, there's always, again, we're simplifying, but there's three kind of cornerstone ways to structure goals. Is you can have outcome-based goals, which are measurable. Like for instance, something like, hey, it's your job to double our sales. And we can measure the sales today and we can measure the sales at the end of the period. We can compare those two numbers and we can establish whether or not you doubled. It's like an easy way to measure that goal. And it's based on the outcome. And we're not saying about anything about how you get there. And you can have metric-based goals, and that's more about like doing the work of, hey, we have to close tickets out in this system. Right? I'm working a help desk. Tickets are coming in at this rate. If you're going to work on my help desk, you have to close 12 tickets a day, right? And so I can measure that and I can see. But it's not about the outcome. It's about like the work, about what your throughput is, your productivity. And then you have observation-based goals, which could be both, could be neither, could be somewhere in the middle, where it's more like, look, I mean, what I need to see improvement in this area. And I'm going to use my personal judgment as to whether or not you've improved. Or we might have other people assessing, but it's not quite as structured as the other. And these are, of course, the worst goals out of the three. But a lot of times what you see in business and in life is it's okay to make a bad decision if it's your best decision. Right? Like sometimes your best option can still be like a weak option, and you just got to go with it. So, we want to recognize that sometimes that's what the best answer is. And again, we talked a little bit before about explicit versus implied things, and with goals it's the same thing. If you don't have any goals, then there's like always this implied goal of just do the work as assigned, right? Do what you're told type stuff, which is okay. It depends on how structured those work streams are, though, for whether people are going to be successful or not. So this is like, we can Google some of these things later, but when we talk about outcome-based tools, like the kind of the dominant force now is OKRs. I think Google was the first one that came up with it. It stands for objectives and key results. And what you have is you have some aspirational goal up at the top, and then that's the objective. And the key results are more measurable things. And you want like really specific things like, hey, I want, we're getting killed on our Yelp reviews. So for this 6-month period, I want the average, we're going to improve our customer satisfaction. And the way we're going to measure that's the objective. The key result would be we're going to look for at least an average of 4-star reviews on Yelp for this time period or something. And you would have multiple key results to back that up. And then in general, with all goals, but especially with OKRs, you would want to tie people's compensation to that, right? As you would say, like, well, and you could go all or nothing. You can say, hey, if you're at 3.9, you didn't achieve it, you get nothing. Or you can say, hey, we're getting 3.1 right now. So every 0.1 you get a 10% of your bonus target. Right, so if you get to 4.0, you get 90% of your bonus target. You get to 4.1, you get 100. You get to 4.2, you get 110%. You can structure things like that. This is best for people that have a lot of authority, right? Because you're objective based, you're outcome based, right? But you need people that have the time and space to operate to achieve those outcomes. They can't be like, you can't be saying, oh, you're working in the help desk and you're punching 12 tickets a day. But at the same time, you're responsible for the global customer satisfaction. You're not in a position to achieve that outcome, and it might happen with or without you, but it doesn't make sense to give that person that goal. So these would be for people like executives or people in charge of a business unit or something, people with a lot of control, either individually or autonomy as an individual, or a lot of control over an organization where they can impact change on that organization directly, which would then indirectly achieve the result that's associated with the goal. And then when you look at the what did I call them? The metric-based KPIs are super popular, key performance indicators, and it's exactly what you would expect. Is like we're just going to figure out some way to measure something, but the thing we're going to measure isn't going to be what we really want. Like what we want is better code quality, but that's hard to measure. So we're going to pick something easy to measure, like how many bugs you fix, or how many lines of code you write, or how long it takes for something you produce to be code reviewed and merged into the code base or something like that. So KPIs are dangerous for this reason, is that you're not actually asking for what you want, you're asking for what's easy to measure. But sometimes that can work really well with super highly constrained jobs. Like so you look at if you ever like own or operate a franchise, right? You get a playbook for a franchise. Like here's what the 3 jobs are, and they do this, right? Here's your 10 steps. Is you do this, then you take a 5-minute break, and then you go back to step 1, right? And when you have highly constrained like roles like that, where it's like this is what your job is to do. We're not looking for discretion. We're not looking for anything. But if you do this, if you run the book the right way, then we will achieve our goals. KPIs are great for that, because then it's like, okay, well, I'm running a cash register and I can process 15 people an hour, and the other people can only do 12. That's a better cashier. And that helps you achieve what you're looking for as an organization. So again, these are all just tools for structuring goals, and like any tool, you want to use it in the right situation. So this is just this kind of framing, and for all of these things, the best way to really understand these things is to see them misapplied. Like when you see these things misapplied, you're like, well, this doesn't seem right, and then you see the outcome, and you're like, well, that's obviously the wrong answer. We'll go in a different direction. And then when you look at the other forms of goals, there's different frameworks for this, but the easiest one to conceptualize is what they call the SMART framework for goals. And so it stands for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. So when you're doing that observational based stuff, you try to achieve these things. And if you do it well, then you probably end up with one of the other 2 systems. But again, like a lot of times when you're doing something like this, it's more like it's more in a situation where you're looking for improvement or growth or something that's hard to put a specific number on. And so you try to find some other way of how am I going to measure these things, and like how long will we give somebody to focus in these areas of improvement. So we're going to move on to feedback. Feedback's a huge part. Oh, question, Frank.
Let me offer a comment here, Martin.
Sure.
I think our students might find it interesting as well. You're talking about goals. So prior to the mid-90s, when the accreditation people would come to the university to try to evaluate your goals, it was all metrics. They would say, okay, lay out on a table here, what courses are you teaching? What's the syllabus? Show me some examples of homework assignments. Show me some examples of student work. And as long as you had all this stuff lined up, they would say, check the box, okay, you're doing a good job, you met your goals. Okay, then around the mid-90s, it changed from metric-based goals to outcomes-based goals. So the question then was, how do you know that anybody's learning anything? So you're teaching all these courses, but how do you know that this knowledge is getting into your students' head? That's much more hard, that's much more difficult to evaluate as a goal structure. And so then what happened was, we're gonna go out to our alumni, and we're gonna start surveying them 2 years out, and 3 years out, and 5 years out, and ask, what courses were vetted? Did you learn anything from your 3-credit course in dynamics, And so that changed about the mid-90s from metrics-oriented goals to outcomes-oriented goals in the academic world.
Yeah,
that's a point I wanted to make.
Well, thank you for that. And another good example in academia is standardized testing, where it's like they're trying to say, okay, well, hey, we want to like normalize all these schools across the country so that you can kind of calibrate based on that. And like it works like the first couple of times you do it, but then people start like teaching to the test, or like people with like wealthier backgrounds are able to prepare specifically for the test in ways that people from disadvantaged backgrounds can't and stuff. And you end up with, okay, well now what are we even doing anymore? Because it's not measuring what it was supposed to measure. And I think that debate, of course, is going on right now. You all, I think when you guys applied to college, I think the era was no standardized tests at all. Like my kids are in high school now, they're going to be in the era of it's probably optional. And then like who knows what's going to be like 5 or 6 years down the road. It's like this is hard stuff, right? And like anything else, it's fluid, right? What works today doesn't necessarily work tomorrow or next year or 6 months from now, or what works for you as an individual in one organization, when you go and take those skills to another organization, you have a whole different set of problems, and what made you successful there may not make you successful somewhere else. And that's why it's important to understand why you do these things and where and when you do these things, versus just knowing what it is. Because if your playbook only includes SMART goals, because that's what you learned the first time, and you had a great team and everyone was successful, then you're going to think SMART goals are the answer. But you get in a different situation without the great team, and you'll learn, well, now we have to get more creative. So feedback's a big part of being in management, but it's also a big part. Like, it isn't just about giving feedback, but that's a big element of it. In terms of giving feedback, the best thing to say is to be clear and to be brief. It's not necessarily a time for creativity, and you see that a lot in the business world in general. Is that creativity? It has its places, but in most circumstances, you're better off being brief and clear rather than being creative. And that's not universal, but feedback is exactly one of those. And the mistake that people make is they downplay critical feedback. Right? Big mistake. Right? You can't downplay it. It is what it is. Right? What I try to do is I try to have myself and everyone else have a forward-only mindset. Right? This happened. Right? This happened. We have to do better. Let's talk about how we can do better. That's the end of the feedback, unless there's questions about, I thought I was doing a great job. Why is this a problem? Right? And you can go into detail then. You always want to have specific, like the clarity stuff, having specific examples, and being confident in your words is important. But there's other forms of feedback too. Like, you might be giving feedback upwards in the organization, right? Like, I feel like the executive leadership of this organization they appear selfish, and it doesn't really seem that they care about me as a person. Now, whether or not that's true, the fact that somebody feels that way is important feedback, right? And that's potentially a correctable thing. And building an organization where you have the trust where people are able to do that is important. Or having a peer, right? And you can see this even in a college environment, like or the Harry Potter movie, right? Like, Neville's first house points was for standing up to his friends. Like, that's important to be able, someone that you work with, someone that you like, to be able to say, I did not like this. I did not like this thing that happened. We need to be able to talk about this, but we're not gonna talk forever about it. I want to acknowledge this, and then we want to go on. So that's feedback. Now receiving feedback is a whole different matter, right? So when you're receiving feedback, and this can be challenging too. And the first thing is when you're giving feedback, you want to be thinking about how you would receive it. And one of the important things is that people communicate different ways, and you'll see lots of systems for articulating that. And people from like psychology backgrounds or some of like the liberal arts that everyone makes fun of in the job world, like, some of those are incredibly valuable in terms of understanding the psychology behind these things. But for some people, if you deliver a message they're not expecting, they will not hear anything else you say for the rest of the day. Right? And you have to understand that that's possible. And so the way you might do something is you might say, I'm going to deliver this feedback, and then we're going to meet tomorrow to talk about it. But I want you to have it now outside of a discussion, so that it doesn't distort our discussion tomorrow. It's the same thing with receiving the feedback. If you're getting feedback that you're just like you got the feedback, and the person keeps talking, and you're 2 minutes into the conversation, you might just want to say, just hang on a second. I didn't hear a word you said after this. Can you give me 30 minutes to think about this? Or can we talk after lunch? Like, I just need some time to process what you said, because I'm not understanding any other words you're saying. It's not always possible, but understanding how you receive feedback is important. And again, all this stuff is omnidirectional, not just like up and down, but sideways and everywhere else. So like, if you're in a position of power, right, there's a power differential between the two people, and you as the upside of that, you want the feedback, right? There's nothing you can do to get the feedback that will be as effective as asking for it directly one-on-one. Right? So if you say, I have an open door policy, you can always come and talk to me, and I want to know what's going on and stuff like that. And none of that ever works. Like, no one will ever do that. But if you go to someone and you sit down with them and you say, look, how am I doing? Right? Like, what would you say, like, was the biggest mistake I made in the last 6 months? Right? Some people will tell you, right? And they'll tell you, and they were always willing to tell you, but they weren't going to walk into your office. They weren't going to, because it's different, right? It's different giving solicited feedback versus unsolicited feedback. And this is like a super important thing to think about, right? Like when you write a paper and you hand it in and you get a grade, right? You were soliciting that feedback, and you might be disappointed or something, but that's very different than having someone walk by and say, hey, I saw your paper on your desk and it sucked, and you're like, what's that? Like, I don't need to hear that. Like, I'm not interested in your opinion anyway. And so like that whole notion of soliciting feedback is really important, especially if there's a power differential. So something to think about. Because if you're on the downside of a power differential, then probably you're in a position where you're going to be receiving unsolicited feedback no matter what, right? So like your manager will give, or your teacher will give you the feedback or something like that. Or your parent will give you the feedback. It's hard to escape some of these things. But so always be thinking about those things. And then these next two things are more when you're receiving feedback in a position of power, like in a management role or something like that. The number one thing you want to do is you want to acknowledge the feedback, right? Pause the conversation. Like, I hear you. Like, it might even, like, even a theatrical element, like you write it down, you add it to your notes, you capture that, right? That's an important event. Like, that people want to feel heard. And that's an important part of, you don't just brush it off. The same way you don't downplay feedback when you're delivering it to someone, you don't downplay feedback when someone's delivering. Even if you don't think it's important, the fact that they trust you enough to provide the feedback is important. And you as a leader or as a manager, you want to encourage that. And so you want to create these feedback loops, and it all starts with acknowledging feedback. So one of the tools that we use is every 6 to 12 months, our whole management team, we take all the feedback that we've received and we kind of vet it for the ones which would be of general interest, and we talk about it with the whole team. Like, here's feedback we received over the last 6 months, and there'll be like 20 points on there, and we talk about what we've done, how we saw things. Like, yes, we were aware of that when it was brought to us, but you talk through the whole thing, and the person that provided that feedback feels really good about the fact that they provided that feedback, and you create a lot of benefits to the organization. So there's a lot of different ways to acknowledge it. That's one of the things that we do. And then acting on the feedback is the most powerful thing. You can't always do it though, right? Because you may not agree, or it might be inconsistent with other goals that you have as an organization or something. But if someone says something like, hey, having meetings on Friday afternoon is really, like, a lot of people are upset about it. I'm just the first to say it. And then 2 weeks later, there's no more meetings afternoon. Like, there's no clearer message that the feedback was heard than acting on it, right? Or at least getting up and talking about it, say, hey, this one meeting, it turns out, is the only way you can do it because we have people in different time zones and stuff. And so that one stays, but everything else goes. Like, you can address these things in different ways. And you can do it privately or publicly or something like that, but the actions are super important. So when you're trying to create feedback loops, you want to think in terms of all of these. And again, it's like, it's all omnidirectional, right? So if you're an early career person and your manager says something, even if it's critical feedback, it's like, okay, I heard that, I understand, you're writing it down. I'd like to think about this over the weekend. Can we talk on Monday? I'll have some ideas about how I can improve in that area. And then 2 weeks later, your manager is like, hey, I've really noticed a difference, right? Like, we were talking about, you seem to lack recall of important conversations. And I see you're using these tools to create notes and stuff, and you're much more confident and authoritative in these conversations and stuff, and a huge improvement. Right, that's what that feedback looks like on the kind of the downside of the power. And I told you some of the tools you can use on the upside. So, like, really important. Like like it says, like, it sounds simple on the first slide. It's like, oh, you're giving feedback, you're setting expectations, giving feedback, you're communicating. But feedback itself, you can talk a huge amount about that. Like I said, like, it's not even. It's more like the psychology of it is super important, and understanding, like, the different, like, mental models for people is really valuable. My CS degree is useless for this and a lot of this other stuff. Like, it's you learn by doing, right? So communication, I mentioned. Like, number one thing with communication is, I mentioned before, how creativity isn't always what you want. If you let partial information kind of leak out through your organization, people will get creative, and they usually get creative in really depressing ways. Like, they'll think, okay, well, I heard that this person, this member of the faculty that I like, won't be around after Tuesday. I heard that. I heard it from these other people, fragments of information. And you're like, oh, well, now I'm going to think that, okay, they're leaving for the worst possible reason I can imagine. Now I hate the whole school and I want to transfer out or something like that. You have no idea what's going on out there. So if you're aware of a message, the best thing to do is to share the information authoritatively to a large audience, right? And to take ownership of that. where unambiguous, like this is the information that I have, I'm sharing it with you. Second best thing is when you've been trying to keep it secret and you understand that that's not quite the secret you thought it was, is to do it then. And the worst thing you can do is after everyone's all fabricated their own version of the thing, is to even talk about it at that point. You just look stupid, right? And so you always have to be thinking about sharing information. Like again, even potentially embarrassing information. And you might be in a position where you have a duty of confidence and you can't do it, right? But you have to really think about these things, about compartmentalizing stuff where if you can't keep it in the group it needs to be in, you really need to share it as widely as you can, as quickly as you can. And of course, the rules are different if you're like the CFO of a public organization. There's definitely roles that you can have, or a founder when you're out there fundraising. You are absolutely going to say radically different things to the people you're fundraising from than you are going to say to your clients, than you are going to say to your team. You're going to have to, because if you told the truth to any three of those, any one of those groups, they're all going to, abandon you. Like when you're like in some high growth, founding situation, it's all based on aspirational messaging, right? Like most of what you say, you aren't quite there yet. It's just a matter of time. So having a plan is super important. This is more the leadership side. So we won't talk about how to get a plan. But you should have a plan, right? And you need to share that plan with people. And then specifically, you need to share the plan for your organization, and every single person who's a member of your organization needs to know how they fit into the plan. What does this mean to me? What is the plan for me, right? You have to have all these stories. And you don't necessarily have to share them. Like I wouldn't necessarily say we have I think about 15 people here. I wouldn't necessarily say, well, here's the plan, and now I'm going to go name by name and say exactly what the plan is for you and everything we consider and how we ended up here. But if one of you came to me later and say, well, how did you decide to put me here? I can say, well, that's a great question. Like, here's what we consider for you. We considered A, B, and C. We chose C because you were actually the only person that could do C. A lot of people could do A and B, so we put those people there, and whatever the answer is. And you of course you always want people to be doing valuable work and be important to the organization. And if you can't do that, then you need to be honest with people. You say, well, you're over here because like we just don't trust you enough right now to work on this thing which our whole company depends on, right? If we mess that up, people are going to lose their jobs, right? And that's going to be a really sad day for all of us. And I just don't trust you enough, and here's why. And here's the things you need to work on to be able to work on a team like that. If you can't have that conversation, you're probably not in the right role to be able to do this. But you have to, again, we're not trying to be jerks about it. We're trying to be clear, and we're trying to have a path forward. If there's no path forward for someone, they shouldn't be in the conversation. They should be, exiting the organization. Cascading communications is a huge thing, especially in hierarchical organizations, where, so I'm in the middle of the organization. I get a message from my boss. What am I supposed to tell my people? And being clear about that is important, to say like, okay, well, am I supposed to share that message? Am I supposed to sanitize it and share it? Am I supposed to keep that to myself and wait for you to share it? Like those are the kinds of conversations you want to have with your team or with your boss or with anyone to make sure like you understand what your obligations are. Because you can get in a lot of situations where you are incredibly knowledgeable, and if you're not sharing that information appropriately, you might be failing to expectations there. Like it might have been considered part of your job to propagate that when you're just thinking, oh, that was a casual conversation. I thought I was just being informed personally, but you weren't. You were being informed as like an agent of your whole organization. You have to propagate that. So again, something to always think, and also in your communications where, hey, we're talking about this now, and you should communicate that to your people on this timeline, right? To be clear about that. And then one-on-ones are a big part, and that's something that you can Google. But like having one-on-one time with everyone in your organization is important. And the key message for me about one-on-ones is that it's less about the work, right? It's not like a work meeting. How is the work going? Or what's your progress type thing? It's more about all the things outside the work, like more like how are you doing? Like what are you struggling with? Is there anything that I need to know that would affect how you're utilized, right? Like if you have like a sick family member, right? Like, well, let's actually tuck this person away in a part of the organization where the work is easy and not challenge them. Versus, hey, you know, my wife and I are saving up to buy our first house, and I'm you know, ready for significant challenges, and to say, okay, well, now I know this about you. So when we're making the plan, the more we know about our people, the better job we can do of putting them all in a position to succeed and to meet their individual goals and to meet the goals that we have for them in an organization. So the one-on-ones, you should always be thinking about getting really to know the people and understand their life goals, especially so that you can align that with, you know, their path through the organization. How's everyone doing? All right, we only lost one person. I think they're coming back. Their computer's still here. Okay, so that's it for management for now. Again, like these things are all intertwined. You would just stop for questions, or should I just keep rolling on? Any management questions? All right. We'll talk about the organization then. So I think there's three things that are important when you're looking at an organization, because like the management is obviously a huge part of it, but when I look at designing an organization, I'll talk about the second bullet first. Like just figuring out how you're going to compartmentalize things is important, right? So compartmentalization is important because within a compartment, you would expect goal alignment. Everyone in that compartment is working towards the same thing. And outside of the compartment, you may not see that. And so, like, again, you see that very, I know we're in the College of Engineering, so you'll always see that with engineering and sales, right? They're just, the sales, all they want to do is sell something that you don't have, right? Like that's their mission in life. And then the engineers are just like, I can't believe it. Now we got to do this thing. It's like disrupting our plans. You can tell which side of the equation I'm on. You know, but that's okay, right? Because they're structured, like that's intentional. But then you'll see these roles. You'll see roles like a technical sales or pre-sales or something. Those are people that are in the engineering group typically, and they're like doing demos and stuff, and they're aligned. The whole reason you do that is you have people participating in the sales process that are part of the engineering compartment, and their goals are associated with that. They're focused on demoing what we do have and having a wealth of information about the problems we can solve today and stuff that kind of balances things out. So in organization design, those compartments is really important. And then career ladders are important. This is, you know, just what the career paths are. And they're not exactly linear, but like in your early career, like a lot of them are linear for the first, we'll say 0 to 5, 7 years for a lot of professions you would choose. And then recruitment's a big part of building an organization. So career ladders, this is one of those things where I'm sure now you guys, who is this guy, right? Like I can't believe, like whatever this is, I'm not going to like it. And it's one of those things where when you see it used effectively, it's a great tool. And when you don't, it seems like a giant waste of time. And I think both perspectives are absolutely right. But what you do with a career ladder is you build one for every job function. Right? So for like software engineer is a job function, regardless of the level you are, right? And regardless of like any specialties or disciplines or something like that. So we have one career ladder for that, and one career ladder for another. And then the career ladder really lays out all the different levels, right? So you have like an entry level position, you have a senior level position, you have other things. And then there's specializations that you can see. And we'll talk about several, but obviously like management's a specialization in a field. So like I'm part of the career ladder for software engineer, but I'm way off on some branch, you know, of the point of no return. So you construct all this stuff and then you mount titles on it. And you use that as a tool for a variety of purposes, which we're going to get into. Just to lay out a couple of these things, just like the job functions could be literally anything at all, right? And so I lay some here. I was trying to stay away from the engineering ones, but like mechanical engineering, right, or aerospace engineering, civil engineering. These are all really common, and they all, you'll see a lot of commonality, especially like in the branch points. And then the career progression, what it looks like is you typically have very little fragmentation in the beginning, especially for engineering disciplines. Whereas entry level is where you start, and I would describe that as qualified but inexperienced, and honestly, you're completely useless I was useless when I came out of school. Like no matter how good you and internships help with some things, but you'll learn more in your first 6 months on the job than you have at any point in your life up to that point. Like it's just different, right? And so the expectations are low with entry level. You're really one of the primary things is growth. Like when you're looking at your entry level staff, if they're not growing, you're not happy. Like you're not basically paying them to perform at that level forever. You're willing to pay them to perform at that level just long enough to get them up to be senior. And senior brings with it more than just doing the work, right? So entry level is what you call a high labor position. You're doing the work all the time, right? You're not really doing anything other than the work. Senior though, you kind of have this triad of planning, delivery, and oversight, right? And so like the work might be a third of your job or half your job or something like that. And the rest of the time you're doing planning and oversight of people, either peers or people, lower down the career path than you, and that's part of how you make your early career people successful. And then this intermediate transitional thing, what that looks like, and so like in terms of timing, like entry level is usually like 2 to 3 years of experience, and then senior is usually like 5 to 7. So the intermediate and the transitional is everything in between. What you see with the transitional people is they perform like a senior when they do the work, but they don't have the skills to do the planning and oversight yet. Right, and so what you see, and you see this in software a lot. Like I've seen it my whole career, where people like around their 5-year mark, they'll become the best professional developer they'll ever be at the 5-year mark. They won't get better no matter how far they rise up in the ranks, but their impact as they rise up in the ranks will grow significantly as they accumulate those other professional skills that are kind of a multiplier for your direct work skills. So you start off entry level where you're focused on growth, then you get to transitional and you're focused on really achieving excellence, like the best you're going to be in terms of a producer, still high labor, right? And then you're focused less on your labor and more on sharing your expertise across the organization. So really, really common, especially in the engineering field, that you have that kind of career progression. Takes you up to about 5 or 7 years. And then you get to these branch points. It's one form of specialization. And what I see, like, so one is management, that's human organizational specialty. It's orthogonal to your field, but especially in the technical fields, credibility is part of what makes you successful, right? And so managing people in your same job function, like you will be more successful just because you're respected more and your words carry weight. And you can, when you give somebody a recommendation, you can tie an anecdote to it, which actually has an impact on them, and they're more likely to help. And they can follow in your footsteps, or you can share your mistakes or something. You're more relatable. You can be a successful manager without that. And then there's some like, especially when you get outside the engineering disciplines, there's areas where you can be a successful, like a lot of managers aren't managing their own job discipline. The outcome-focused people, like so when you're on the entrepreneurial path, these are the roles you want. Like hey, this customer is really unhappy, make them happy with technology or whatever your skills are, and here's some people to help you, like people that can satisfy those outcomes. So management escalates to something like a VP of engineering, like my role today. The outcome people, they escalate to like a general manager of a business unit or like a practice lead. But honestly, the ultimate escalation for the outcome-based people is founder. I think, and for a lot of them individually. And then that's supposed to be technical, sorry for the spelling error. You get a title like a research fellow or architect or something like that in the software, and I think there's a lot of different distinctions there of like whatever, a distinguished engineer. There's a lot of titles that you'll see around there. That escalates ultimately to something like a chief technology officer in software. Which is a title I've held before, so I have a lot of experience across all 3 of those specialties. And that's how you have a bigger impact than just being a senior level practitioner. It's less about, it's less about planning and oversight, and it's more about scope of responsibility and a hero aura and being able to attract people to your banner, right? It's like, how do I get the best people to get into this organization to achieve these goals, right? You have to have like some gravity usually to do these things. Like how can even if like we all have the shared opinions, how can I lead the conversation to make sure that this outcome that I believe in is the one that's chosen? A lot of it is about influence and communication and relationships, and a lot less about the technical stuff, because a lot of the people in the room will have very similar technical backgrounds, and so you can't win on just a direct weighing of the brain. You can see specialization in the early career too. So like an example of that would be like in a law firm, or like if you're entry level in a law firm, whether you're a lawyer or a paralegal, you focus on like some super narrow part of the law. And as you graduate up to senior, it's like, okay, well, I just have more things in my portfolio, right? Or like you can see in the jobs I described that are highly compartmentalized, like in a franchise business or like a retail or something, where it's like, okay, well, all I'm doing is like stocking shelves or something. I'm highly specialized. As I grow to like the mid-level, well, I can, stock shelves, I can mop floors, I can run the register, I can close up, I can do like all these. So I become less specialized as I grow. It's not that common, but you can see it in some things. There's a lot of like late career specialization, and the department specific thing is one of those things that has to do with tenure, where like every organization has things that aren't a full-time job, right? And people will accumulate them like barnacles over their time there, and that makes you more valuable, right? Like you have knowledge other people don't have. You're willing to do work other people aren't willing to do. You can do something with confidence that other people are afraid to touch. Right. So accumulating those kinds of specialties are super important when you're looking. This is more like when you're looking at as a early career person on my own path, growing, like accumulating those specialties is super valuable. And then when I'm as a manager, that should terrify me, because now people are worth more to me than they are on the open market. Right. And that can cause problems. Or like if this person gets sick or hit by a bus, I have a gap in my organization. So when you have to want to recognize those specialties and you want to socialize them. You don't want them to be accumulated with one person, but you want to recognize that anyone that accumulates any number of specialties is more valuable, right? And then, of course, if a specialty grows to dominate either multiple people or one person, you do want to create a full-time job for it. And so that's like one of the real challenges in organizational design, is deciding whether something's a part-time, shared, socialized responsibility, or whether it's a full-time job, and then how do I go and fill that. So there's a lot of different categories of specialization. And then I thought I should talk about management specialization a lot, because that's not obvious to a lot of people, like what these titles even mean. Again, this is a simplification, but I think this is a really helpful simplification. When I think of a manager, you're managing only individual contributors, right? People that are not managers report to you, and probably they all have the same job function. I manage a team of technical writers. I'm a manager. It's not an easy job, but it's an easier job than some of the other things. It's a good way to get started. And you're focused really on individual growth and performance. You're just worried about your people. You're not worried about the work output so much. You don't have that responsibility. You're just working on the people, right? You can really focus on that. So managers in a lot of organizations, that's kind of what that means. And then director, there's a couple of challenges to being a director. One is, you usually get more heterogeneous reports, because like managing 5 people that are all the same job function, it's pretty easy. You can treat them all the same, especially if they're the same level, right? 5 senior technical writers, same playbook over and over and over again. But if you give me like a senior technical writer and a mid-level software engineer and an entry-level tester and this other project manager, or every single conversation is different, and you have to accumulate a lot more. So the heterogeneous teams is a significantly higher level of difficulty. And that's associated, I think, in a lot of organizations with a director level. And of course, managing, a part of that heterogeneity is having, managers and individual contributors together, because it's very different in terms of how they're evaluated. Like, I work with an individual contributor, I can see how their work is. But for a manager, like, they're responsible for people. Like, part of the reason you have the manager is so you don't have to worry about those people. But you can't evaluate the manager without knowing those people and getting feedback from those people and stuff. So there's a complication there in being a director. And then also, the directors typically have more outcome functionality. So those are 3 separate things that make it harder to be a director than a manager. Is that you're not worried just about the people, right? You have a mix of people. You have managers and individual contributors, and you care about like what you're actually trying to achieve. And then with the executive level, really what makes that challenging, you usually have much greater financial responsibility, and that works in both ways. Like, so you have like a $7 million budget, and next year we need to spend $10 million. And I'm sure none of you have seen Brewster's Millions, but it's worth seeing. It's one of Richard Pryor's better movies. It's back in the early 80s. Spending $3 million effectively is hard, right? Like hiring people in a short time period is hard. Knowing like how and what they're going to work on, like building that out, that's hard. And it's equally hard to reduce spending, and that's just awful. Right, I mean, just having to, like, especially when you're letting people go that did a good job, like that's one of the worst parts of being in executive management, especially. It's really terrible. And then abstract problem solving is a big one, right? So examples of that would be something like, we're weak in this area and we need to get better, right? And so like, well, do I hire? Do I bring in contractors? Do I hire, get a consulting firm? Do I outsource it? Do I bring in training? Do I take my best people and say, hey, for 3 months, you're not gonna actually do any work, you're just gonna train up in this area? Like those are hard, like you have to know a lot, and you have to be willing to make a mistake, and you have to be willing to course correct very quickly. These are hard problems to solve, and that's usually what the executive people do. Now, when you look at smaller organizations, like organizations smaller than 50, for instance, what you'll see is that the title matters less. Like whoever's the head of the department has to do all these things, right? So it's like, it's not as simple as saying like, oh, that's an executive or something, but it gets to the career ladder, it gets to a lot of these elements where the titles matter, right? Like if you don't just wanna say, oh, you're the leader of this team, I'm just gonna make you a director, right? Because there's expectations that come with that. And if the person receiving that title doesn't understand those expectations, then you're kind of headed for disaster. Or other people, like your title sets expectations all around you. And that's part of what the career ladder does, is the career ladder documents what's expected of these people with these titles, right? So, hey, the ladder says that a director is supposed to have these 3 things. This person's a director and they have no direct reports at all, and it's not even clear what they're working on. How is that right? Why are they a director of engineering? It doesn't make sense. And you should be comfortable giving that feedback, and whoever is responsible for that should have a good answer, right? And they should fix that problem, right? Because it sends a terrible message to other people. Giving someone the wrong title also prevents the right people from doing the work. Because if you have a vacancy, right? If you have a vacancy in your organization, at least people know it's vacant, and you may say, hey, do you mind if I give that a shot? This seems like a problem. I know a guy, a database expert. I know a guy who might solve that problem for us, right? Because you know you have no executive who's tasked with solving that problem. But if you have an executive that's tasked with it, who's incapable of doing it, well, now you're done, right? You're really hard to be successful when you do that. So you take like the cross product of all your job functions and all the levels and stuff, and you lay all these things out. And so now people know what's expected of them based on seniority and based on their title and based on their organization. Now, a really important part of this is that you want gaps in your ladder. I mean, but what I mean by that is that if I'm like, say I'm an entry level, whatever, I'm an entry level accountant. Like you want the person to be able to be a high performing entry level accountant, but still not be ready to be that transitional level. You want to have these gaps. And the reason you want to have these gaps is so you can build growth plans. Like you can have these fair compensations. The person comes to you and says, hey, I want to make 90. I'm making 75, I want to make 90. And you pull out the book and you say, look, these are the roles that make 90, right? And they do these 5 things, and you only do 3 of them. But if you can do the other 2, then you'll make 90. And let's work on it, right? We're doing one-on-ones, right? We're working together, we're setting expectations, we're giving feedback. I'm your manager, I know this is a goal of yours now. I will make sure you get opportunities to show that you're capable of oversight. Right? To show that you're capable of delivering a project of this size, whatever is in there, right? I will give you those opportunities. And if you don't achieve them, then that doesn't end the conversation. We'll keep working. And if you do achieve them, then you get what you want, right? But I'm not gonna give you the number just because you asked for it. In our organization, like that number is associated with this level of contribution. And I will give you that title, and everyone will know that's what you're capable of. And so someone else can come to you and say, hey, will you look at this work of mine, right? I need your feedback. And I know that it's expected of you to provide that level of oversight and feedback for someone else's work, right? Super important to have those gaps. So it's not just a question of, hey, I've gotten 5% raises, like, for the last 6 years, and I've creeped into this pay band, right? I should get the title. And it's like, obviously we've made all kinds of mistakes now, and I could give you the title or not give you the title, but how'd you get up that high when you only do these couple things, right? So it's super important thing. So, and I spent most of my career thinking titles didn't matter. And I was convinced when I saw, just at different points in my career, the misapplications of titles and the problems that it solved. And so there's different tools. I think I have slides on this later that talks about some of the tools that you can use. If I don't, I'll talk about it at the end. But it's like the notion of a vacancy and the notion of a temporary position are super important in terms of setting expectations for your organization. So that compartmentalization is an important part of your organizational design. There's really 3 ways to do this, right? And again, there's more than three, but there's three we're going to talk about. So one is you can organize your department by job functions, right? So Martin's the VP of engineering, all the engineers report to him. This other person's the VP of product, all the product people report to them. It's all based on job functions, makes certain things really easy, right? Like you can like judge performance really well because I'm just like I have 27 software engineers, right? I know all there is to know about how they compare relative to each other, and they all have the same prioritization, the same education, the same training and stuff. Like I've controlled all that stuff really well, so that makes that easier. You can align by the goals and prioritization, right? So it's like we want to improve. These people will say these people are going to prioritize our 5 goals in this order, right? They're going to be increasing revenue, increasing morale, and lowering costs or something like that. You can take everyone that's going to prioritize the goals in that order, put them in one organization, and the people that might prioritize them in a different order in a different organization. Because what you'll see, you can give people the same goals, but if you're working with your highest priority with me, and I have the same goal, but it's my lowest priority, we're going to be a bad match. Right, and we're going to hate each other because you're going to be pestering me, and I'm going to be like, well, this guy's really irritating, and you're going to be like, well, he's not helping me. He doesn't care about my stuff, and I don't. Right, I just told you it's my lowest priority, right? So it's like I'm obligated to help you, but like it's a terrible situation. But you can figure out how to avoid that by getting the people that have the same order of priorities and getting them together in the organization. And then you can do it by outputs. You can say, okay, we have 3 software products. So everyone that works on product A is in this organization with this leadership. And this is like a more recent model, but it breaks things. Like you don't end up with a title of like VP of engineering, right? I'm not in charge of software. You're like VP of this product or something, or you're more of like a delivery outcome. And we talked about like some of the different specialties and stuff. So you're more of an outcome-based person, and you'll have a heterogeneous team where all 3 of your teams might have engineering, product, operations, support, help desk, technical writing, project management. Everyone has kind of the same heterogeneous, and it makes it really hard to evaluate people fairly, to say the software engineers on this team are evaluated to the same criteria as people over here. It makes that hard, but it makes it really easy to get everyone on the same page because they're reporting into one structure. They have the same prioritization, they have the same evaluation, the same leadership, the access to the same information. And then you can always mix and match, and then they call that matrix reporting and stuff, where it's like, okay, well, we're organized by job function, but you get assigned to this project. And, it gets complicated when it comes time for performance reviews and stuff like that, but you can look at that. So this is like, again, super important. Like the message for almost everything, whether it's individual based or this, is you always want to align around goals. If you have goal alignment, then a lot of other things become really, really easy. And part of that is if you have goal alignment, you're more likely to be successful. If you're successful, you're more likely to have funding for whatever it is you want. So suddenly, like, I don't care if I'm evaluated equally to this other software engineer on project C, because I'm on project A, which we're super successful and we're all getting big bonuses, and like I'm getting like perfectly good performance reviews, and who even cares anymore, right? Success makes all that other stuff kind of just fall into the woodwork. So then you have to figure out who goes where, right? And so my advice there is you want to design the optimal organization first. Don't be like, okay, well, this person's really good, so they have to be here, and this other person's really good but hates them, so they have to be over here. So now we know we have 2 organizations. You can't do that. Like you have to figure out what's the best organization to solve the problems, and then you put all the people where they best fit. And look, if they don't fit anywhere, then you got to give them a package and get them somewhere else, right? Or find a different role or some sort of career path that can make them successful, outside of what that organizational plan is. Or if everyone goes into bucket A and bucket B is completely empty, well, maybe you got to acquire a company. Maybe you got to, go on some huge like hiring binge to fill that up or something. But the answer isn't to take unqualified people and have them do that work. It's going to prevent better people from doing the work. Right? So design first, put everyone in the best position to succeed, and then let the executives solve whatever problems remain. Right? Like, this pivot is going to destroy us because we've built the wrong kind of company. Right? And you just have to decide, like, if this is an unsolvable problem, well, then you have to, maybe you should not do the pivot. Maybe you're unprepared to execute that plan. You need a different plan. But if you can't have the hard conversations, right? If you don't have the strength to have the hard conversations, then you're going to fail anyway. So it doesn't really make a difference. Focus on those titles, focus on the expectations that comes along with that. Don't be like, you're the highest ranking person in the department, that person's a VP, now you're a VP. big mistake if they're not ready for it. If they're not ready to live up to this, like, it prevents you from doing the right things. Leave things vacant, right? Put it on the org chart, but leave it vacant, right? It basically says, we are willing and expecting to change, right? Like this work, we might have to get it done any number of ways. We would like it to be a full-time person, but this person is not here now, right? Sends a very clear message versus putting someone there and they're like, I don't know if I'm comfortable with this career change, right? Like you put me here and like I know we needed a tech writer, but like I didn't go to school for that. I have different aspirations, right? So it's kind of weird. And you can use the acting title for a situation like that, right? So Martin is senior software engineer and the acting lead tech writer, because he's the only one that's written any of our documentation. He's going to do that job, but by giving him the acting title, now he's made it really clear that he's trying to vacate that role. We want someone else to have that role. It makes it very easy also when you're interviewing people to be like, well, you can talk to Martin because he's doing that job right now. So if you say, what's my day-to-day gonna be like? Well, that's this guy, he's doing it, right? And what will my training be like? Well, this guy that's doing it right now, he's gonna train you because he has great goal alignment. He has every incentive to make you successful, to make sure you have all the information you need. So acting roles to fill out your organizational design is a really valuable tool. And again, don't be afraid to leave things vacant. So recruiting is a big part of things also. It looks like we're pushing up on the time, so I'll try to shoot through this a little quicker. But so early career recruiting is great if you have time to develop your early career people. It's the two things happen. One is it's less cost up front. So if you have easier jobs that are appropriate for that, you'll spend less, right? Which is always nice. But the thing is, if you can keep your early career people as they grow, everything they know will be valuable to you. And this gets to the risk with the established people. The established people have a market value, and when you hire them, you're lucky to capture like 70 or 80% of their market value, right? Because they have skills that you're not going to use, and then those skills have value to other organizations. So you might have to overpay a little bit to get that person based on what they have. And then also, they're gonna have to unlearn stuff to be successful in your organization. It's unlikely they're gonna be a perfect fit, and they're gonna want to, hey, I'm a senior established person, I've been successful doing this, I wanna keep doing things my way, and you have a little bit of friction there, right? So you can be more successful faster with senior level people, but you can be much more cost effective and much long-term more effective by having people early career in your organization that you retain through their careers. Like someone that's like, all they know is everything you've taught them. Their opinions are perfectly aligned with yours, no friction, and if they've been successful, they must have been successful to stick around that long. Then they're going to be on board with your plan, especially when you shift and stuff. Like, I've done this before, I know how this works. Hey, I understand all these expectations. Here's my role. We're going to go knock that out. And if I don't like it, I'm going to tell someone, and I'm going to do a great job for 6 months, and they're going to get me out of there. Right? We're going to make it an acting jump out of there. When you're recruiting, you got to focus between selling on the role and evaluating them. And that can be tricky for a lot of people. And you should always focus on the candidate experience. Like, I don't know why more companies haven't figured this out, but like, you're gonna interview for a role, you're not gonna hire the first person you see. And so because you don't hire the first person you see, at least half the people you see, you're not gonna hire. And probably way more than that, right? And so you're gonna bring all these people into your organization, and then you're gonna send them back out into the world. And you should want them to like you. Right? You should want them, even if they said, I don't want your job, you should still want them to like you, want them to have a positive impression, right? And so you should always focus on treating people very well in the recruitment process. You should, you can communicate clearly, give them feedback, set expectations like, hey, I hope to get back to you next week. If you don't hear from me for 7 days, then it would be totally appropriate for you to reach back out and remind me, and I will get you a status update at that point. We're busy and we're chaotic and whatever, and trying to, help people out. Like, one of the things that we do is when we see someone that isn't a great fit for us, like, we'll make introductions for them that might be more appropriate. Right? And it doesn't even matter if it works out. It's like we're just trying to help people, give them a good experience. And like, you can behave that way, and it can be altruistic and selfish at the same time. But you can also, one of the things, if you're building a small company, doing a lot of hiring, you should hire someone in hospitality. Like, as an engineering student, you guys probably won't be great at that. And if you're like founders, or you're doing the work at a company, you won't have time for it anyway. But you should really focus on how people experience that whole process, especially if they're coming into your office for face-to-face things. Super, super important in recruiting. It's always the easiest to hire for things you're already doing. Can't stress that enough. And part of that, it makes it easier to it's easier to hire if you have like a healthy team where people have time to train and onboard. right? So, and then if you're hiring for commodity things, so if I'm hiring for a technical writer, people know what that is. I can write a job description from my career ladder, just copy and paste it, and people are qualified for that role. It's easy to vet them. But if I'm like, hey, I want someone that's going to be part-time receptionist and also run some wire for this network upgrade we're doing, then that hybrid role, you're going to take forever to try to find that. So industry standard roles are important. Hiring when you're actually ready to help someone is important. And then the converse is all, very hard to hire for something you're not already doing. So it's like, hey, I wish we had a database expert because we don't have any. Let's hire a database expert. Really hard to do effectively. If your team has no time, they're working 80-hour weeks and stuff and weekends and stuff, it's a terrible situation. You hire into that. The person is going to have a tough time being successful if people can't carve out time to help them, know what they're going to do. And you have to have the work for them, the people ready to divest. And then I already mentioned the hybrid roles. A couple things. This is the last slide. One of the things that's super hard in recruiting, and again, if you ever end up in a founder situation, this happens quite a bit, is evaluating someone that knows more than you on a topic, right? So I'm an engineer, I don't know much about sales, and I'm evaluating a salesperson, and they know more than me. I can't tell the difference if they know a little bit more than me than a ton more than me. And it's really brutal. The answer, by the way, is to never do that. Never evaluate for a role where you're not at least of even level for what you're expecting to hire. And the answer is, well, how do I do it then? Is you have to get help from someone else. A trusted advisor, a board member, a family friend, hey, Uncle Joe, you were in sales for 30 years and can you just get on the phone with this guy and see if anything they're saying makes sense and if I should trust them with even with my phone number, right? Get help is what the answer is. Don't do it yourself because you are guaranteed to make the wrong decision. Replacing a long tenured team member is excruciating. You should always have the mindset that everyone's replaceable. It's definitely true. But not everyone is one-to-one replaceable, and that's kind of the key thing, is when you're replacing a long tenured thing, you might have to change your organization to support it. You might have to create 3 positions to do the work they're doing, or hey, these parts of their job go to these existing people just to make this remaining thing easier to fill, right? So that's something. And then if you are in any position of leadership, founders especially, you always want to be in this mindset of stabilize and divest, right? So this gets to not hiring for work you're not already doing. Do the most important work yourself if that's your best option, just long enough to understand it well enough to write the job description, to bring people in, to evaluate them for the role, to divest that responsibility to them, and then you move on. Another way to think about this is it is the responsibility of every leader to create an organization that can survive their departure. It's really important because it doesn't mean you have to leave, right? But if you're unable to leave, right? If you put yourself in a position where the organization will fail without you, you will never get a new opportunity in your whole career. Or if you're a founder, your company will fail because you're not able to do the things the founder needs to do, right? So I'll just repeat that as the last word, is that it's the responsibility of a leader to create an organization that can survive their departure. So that's probably the best thing to think about. These slides are available. We'll share them for people that are interested. There's a couple links in here, just resources for some of the things I mentioned. Like a lot of this stuff you can Google, and it's a crazy mess. But these 3 things at the top there are actually helpful, more helpful than the average ones. And my personal website, there's a lot of other presentation and stuff on there. So thank you all for your time and attention. And we have time for questions. Yes, right.
Just thinking as you're talking, Martin, maybe could you share with our students very briefly, from thinking about it from the student's perspective, if you could maybe capsulate, for a young person just being hired, you're managing a lot of people at various levels. What would be the traits or the characteristics of a young individual coming out of college that you would say, this person's on the fast track?
Yeah.
What would briefly describe that person for them?
Okay, so curiosity, number one thing, right? You want to learn. And you ask questions and you worked on this and it was done, right? And then Monday comes around and 10 times more about it, right? Because you went deep. You solved the problem, but you learned more about how, I looked at this library, now I have these questions, right? So doing the extra work to learn more faster, huge thing that I pick up on. Curiosity, but then the application of that, not just asking questions, but again, people that I had all these questions, so I researched it in the code and I produced this documentation that might be helpful to others. Like to act on that curiosity. Like that's a real like a real real valuable element, I would say. I think that that like the feedback culture is a good mindset to have, and I would couple that with the forward only mindset. It's like being able to like, look, just tell me what my biggest weakness is. I will grin and bear it. Try not to spend more than 30 seconds, right? I just want to know what I should work on, and then acting on that feedback, right? Showing the effort. Like again, like when I talk about people, like, so there's different words I use. But so I'll say like this person, they're an early career software engineer. I might call them, for instance, a rising early career software engineer. That means you're an early career software engineer that we would expect to be promoted soon. They're growing very quickly. So that's a good thing to be called by me. Or I might say, this is a rising early career software engineer with a high ceiling, right? So for most people, like if you don't like leave the field, you'll become senior at some point. But some people never go past senior, and that's totally okay. Some people, they don't have the aspirations for it. They might be in a field where they make plenty of money to meet all their life goals, and they just don't want, like I talked about some stuff, some expectations at the higher levels, and you might be like, thank you, that sounds awful. Like that guy made that executive stuff sounded like really nasty. You may not want that, right? So it's okay to stabilize there. But the people with a high ceiling, typically you mean that they can pass beyond that level. Or if you say like they have an undefined ceiling, I don't know how, like that's like basically this person might pass me in the org chart. So yeah, like having a growth vector. Because I wrote a piece, which I can share this with the slide links. I wrote a piece of basically talking about how to get the most out of college. I wrote it for my kids, they never read it. But one of the things it says, so you get hired, early career, you get hired based on your potential, right? And people, and also like on the value you can bring, right? So it's like, when they talk about the potential, and that's why you get the job, it's because they like you. They like you, you hit it off with people in the interview, they think you're gonna grow, like that's the potential. And then you have some value, your degree, you're able to apply the lessons from your degree in the interview scenario. Like, yeah, this person knows enough that they're gonna be able to actually earn their salary here. And then you start thinking more about value as you grow. Like, oh, am I producing more value? It's a great way to think about it. If I can produce more value, I'll make more money. And it's true in a lot of organizations. And it's okay. If you produce more value and you don't make more money, someone else will take care of that for you. You just leave to go to another organization and get your value there. Right? So it's a very, very healthy way to think about progressing through the career. But the bigger thing is to always be viewed as having that potential. Right? So right now it's like, okay, well, I'm young, I have potential, but you want to be old and have potential too. You want to be a senior or something and have potential and be worth investing in, right? To have the organization be like, well, this person's entry level now, don't worry, in 5 years they'll be this. You want them to be seeing the same thing wherever you are. This person's a director right now, they're going to be a division head in 5 years, right? And so you have to bring that energy and that curiosity. Right? You have to maintain that. You can't always just be thinking about delivering value. You have to also be thinking about growth at all times. And I think that's a very healthy way to think about it. Look, and you'll get. I mean, if you ask that question to every single person that does, you'll get different answers from everyone. So this is like all like, and even like in Certara, like I have my realm of responsibility. It's all true within that realm. But you get different answers from other parts. We have like 1,200 total employees and stuff. So it's like that's definitely like the stuff in the presentation is I think more actionable no matter where you end up or what you end up doing. That last part, like that's more personal for me. So your mileage will vary. But I think it's the right way to think about it.
Any other comments? Good.
So if I want to know someone who's in my division or my team, I can figure out their technical skills pretty quickly. When I hire them, I know what their degree was, I know what their resume was. But how do I evaluate someone for their professional skills? How is that something I identify in people?
Yes, that's a good question. So there's a couple tools that you have for that. I would say there's 3 big tools. The first is how do they conduct themselves during the recruitment, right? I mean, I think that a lot of things they boil down to personality tests, even though you don't really know it. Like, I mean, we're one of the organizations where when someone comes on site for an interview, like our receptionist is part of the evaluation team, right? Not everyone does that, but a lot of companies do that. Or like how you treat people, how you conduct yourself. Like during the recruitment process, there's a lot of opportunities to do that. I think there's like Jack Welch is the the CEO of GE, long since retired. And he wrote lots of books and people still talk about him. He would take people out to lunch, and if they salted their food without tasting it, he would never hire them because he said like, well, they're not collecting enough information before making a decision. So there's like a lot of like parlor games you can do to do this. What we find is that like part of our process is we get people to talk about the work that they've done, and there's just a lot of signaling when people talk about the work that they've done, especially like team projects and stuff. And I think that's helpful. And then the final tool, which large organizations they really can't do it, I don't think, effectively, but small organizations, the reference checks are definitely a part of it. Like you think, like it's very hard to imagine somebody failing a reference check, but I've seen it happen just when, you have like very specific questions that you're asking of, hey, our team values X, Y, and B, what do you think? Will this person be successful there? Right, in that environment, and you get honest answers from people. Because most people, when you're doing a reference, it's more like, oh yeah, they're great, they do great work, love them, do great work, great to be around. When you ask them a question like that, it's like, well, yeah, I mean, like X and Y, they do pretty well, but B, I wasn't expecting, and now that you mention it, I don't know, right? It might be something to follow up on. You might get specific questions about it. I think there's other tools as well, but it's hard. I mean, it's really hard, and it's one of those things where I think, when you make a mistake, when you bring someone in, and not necessarily in that category, but in any category, someone that doesn't work out, like a lot of times, like maybe even on the first day, you're just like, oh God, I just thought of a new question. I'm gonna ask every single person for the rest of my interviewing career that I wish I'd asked that person. You can kind of see that when you're out there interviewing, when you might get some weird questions, and they're really telling. Some other examples of questions though that I've heard, which can just reveal a lot about a person that's hard to prepare for, is like, tell me about the last book you read, right? Like it's an unexpected question, and people have to reveal a lot about themselves, right? And it could be like, well, I don't read, which usually is considered a poor answer to that question. But you can't like stockpile an answer for your whole life. You can't come up with a book that's like 5 years old or something, and you can't just make something up, right? Because you have to make up a lot to support that. And so you kind of like just what the person, or how they even present it or something. Like if you ask me that question at a certain time in my life, I'd be like, well, I haven't read a book in a while, but I read People magazine on the flight in here. Every flight I take, I always love People magazine. It's complete garbage and I can't get enough of it or something. And it tells you something about me, and like maybe it gets me the job or maybe it gets me fired, but like authentic answers are usually the way to go for a lot of these things. Because if that's going to turn people off about me, I'd probably rather find that out before I get the job than after, right? Be unhappy with my coworkers. I don't know if that helps you, but
I would be honest, I think if I were interviewing and asked someone if they read People magazine, that would be like an immediate no for me, because if someone only cares about the lives of other people, and that's their interest.
Well, I only did when I was flying, but yeah. All right, who has the next question? Yes.
You kind of talked about like if you were interviewing someone and then like on the first day you kind of realize like, oh, like this might not be such a good fit. How would you go about conducting yourself like as the manager in that situation? Like if you realize they're not going to be a good fit.
Yeah, so that's a good question. So you get a lot of variance in people's answers to that one. So for me, like what I tell, like not just me but my whole team, what I tell them is when we pick someone, we're committed to their success, even if they're a total dud. Like we will prop them up so we don't look stupid, right? It's like we don't want to look dumb in making a bad hiring decision, and we don't want to be the kind of organization that like if you're not immediately successful, you don't get help anymore, right? And we'll just wait for you to circle the drain and quit, or we'll wait until the end of the year and cut you then, or something like that. Like we don't want to. So we actually like we have a very concrete onboarding pipeline, and so that person would probably not leave the onboarding pipeline for some time, which basically means they're paired with their manager, and they're basically working like all the assignments. They're working collaboratively with the manager to get like just to build up their confidence, to build up their knowledge, or something like that. And if that still doesn't work, then the first corrective action would be to the recruiting process. We would be looking like, what did we do wrong? What can we do to improve to prevent us from getting here? And look, if you determine at some point it's unsalvageable, then we make the unfortunate decision and just cut someone loose. But I think it would take 6 to 12 months for me to do that to a early career person. And it wouldn't be like 6 to 12 months of waiting. It would be 6 to 12 months of exhausting yourself with every idea you had. And then when the rest of your team has given up and they're like, we don't know what else we can do. You just, and then that person should, I would hope, see it coming. But yeah, like it's like I'll tell you. So I'm coming up on like my 30-year anniversary of doing this sort of stuff. You make those sorts of mistakes much less frequently as you do more and more of it, right? And it's just part of, like, that's the thing. It's like the tough part about experience. Like, experience is this like terrible word, right? Where it's used usually to keep people down and to deny them opportunities or something. But there's different ways to think about it, right? Like, experience is something you get right after you needed it, right? And I think that's exactly the circumstance where it's like you learn something there, right? And hopefully you learn something in a way you would never make that mistake again. Don't take it out on the person that skated through your evaluation process because you weren't good enough. Yeah.
What would you say is like the most common mistake you see like new like early hires make in the interviewing process?
Most common mistake.
Maybe something like that they would do that would like turn you off from them.
I think asking about the wrong stuff too soon, right? So it's like if you're like, early stage in the process and you're I'm trying to think of an example of someone like you're asking like weird benefit questions or something, or like, hey, I read this trick about how I can manipulate a Roth IRA. Do you guys have a Roth IRA? Because I want to do this stuff. And you're like, what does this have to do with anything, right? It's like it sends the wrong vibe that you're not interested in the position. You're more interested in like stuff that everyone has, and you should take that interview time to learn about like what makes that company special and what would attract them to you. So I'm trying to think of other examples. Like we just had people that I think talk too soon about like remote versus in person. Like we support both, right? But if you come out like heavy remote as an early career person early in the process, it's probably going to be a no, right? Because early career people, you're going to be more successful in an office environment if the company has that to offer you. And the reason for this is not because of the work. Like you'll develop through the work the same, whether that's been proven a million times even before COVID, and COVID like put the nail in the coffin in that discussion. But what's different is, as an early career person, you'll be part of conversations in an office environment that you would not be part of otherwise. No one's going to randomly join you in to a technical discussion with two architects. No one's going to, the VP having lunch, talking about what he just heard from a meeting with the board, right? You're not going to get that information firsthand, like at that time. You might find out in some big town hall presentation 2 or 3 months later, right? So you'll have access to information and build relationships that you wouldn't otherwise have access to. And it's not that you'll be fine, right? But you'll be better in person, right? But also, like if you like blow the doors off the interview and the team wants you, then fine. You say, oh, and by the way, I got to be fully remote. It's like, great, we love you. You're going to do great. You can be fully remote. But you asked too soon, and it's like, well, like we had a bunch of people. We're going to prioritize the people that, and if you're asked, you should answer honestly. But like some people volunteer stuff like that. I start thinking the same thing with the compensation discussion. Starting the compensation discussion as an early career person, like you have very little leverage, right? It's like your best leverage is going to be getting another job offer. But like a lot of companies, they like what my attitude is like we're going to offer what's going to be fair within our structure. And if we have the best message and we're someone's number one choice, like most people are going to choose us, even if we're off by like 5 or 10K. And we'll get them there because they're going to grow. They think they're going to grow faster in this organization, be better off in 3 to 5 years. So like there's a lot of different attitudes when it comes out to that. But the people that are like, if somebody's like overly concerned with compensation, like squeezing every nickel out of the thing, it's a problem because, especially if you're early career, it's a problem because there's always more money somewhere, right? Everyone knows that. There's always more money somewhere because the market salaries rise faster than like internal raises and stuff. And if you're getting promoted, even if you're getting promoted, it's like, okay, well, I showered money at this person, but now you can just say, look, I'm making this money after 3 years because I'm a high flyer, right? And now I can make even more by switching. So that's always out there. So the people that are like overly focused on compensation, they're gonna be fine. But when you're hiring at the early career, you want people that are gonna make it to senior. You want to kind of carry them, not just for the first 2 or 3 years, but through the first 5 to 7. And so the people that are too focused on compensation probably are gonna leave. So I think that's kind of a mistake in the early career, unless, like, this gets to like the core values. Like everyone has different circumstances. Like you might not have the luxury of leaving $5,000 on the table. You might need that for any number of reasons, right? And just be honest about it and you'll find the right organization. Like that's kind of like always my best advice, is to just be honest, be yourself, right? Answer the questions in the way, not that you think they will be evaluated, but in the way you would evaluate if you were the one asking the questions. And if you get cut, good, right? Because it's an incompatible organization, you probably be, but just know what you feel strongly about, right? You don't draw a line in the sand over something you don't care about, right? And so it's like reversing the early part of the presentation about figuring out like, well, what are the values in an organization that I have to see? What are my 2 core values? Like, what are the 2 things I can't live without, right? Like if you don't have either one of these 2 things, I'm out the door. And you ask that in a screening interview, right? And you walk and you say, I'm sorry, this is too important. I gotta be remote, I gotta make this amount of money, I gotta do like whatever. Like that's totally fine. But if it's not that important to you, it's a huge mistake.
Thank you.
And hopefully I talked in circles long enough you gave up and forgot the question.
No, I did, there was a lot of answers in there about many different things, so very useful,
Cool.
thank you.
All right. So what I'll do, I mean, so we're over time, of course. So I'll thank you all for coming. I'll stay longer to answer questions for anyone that wants to come down and talk in a smaller audience, but we'll release people that feel trapped in the in the room. So I really appreciate you all coming out tonight.
Mr. Snyder, a round of applause. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. Stay warm out there.
Thank you.
Great job. You gonna send me that, or did you send
I
it?
can. I'll send it. I'll send it tonight or tomorrow.
I'll send it today, and what I'll do is if any students send me an email saying,
Yeah.
I have those slides, I'll.
Sure. Yeah.
That's excellent.
Thank you.
Sure, thank you.
Thank you.
I'm sure if they have some questions afterwards, I can share your
Absolutely.
email
Yeah,
address.
I'll send you an email you can share with everyone this contact. I'm always happy to. I think it's like I work with a lot of really good people. I like your presentation.
And you like, I can see you like to interact with young people, so do I. All right, I'm gonna pack up and go
Okay.
home.
Thank you so much.
Let's stay in touch and then we'll see.
No, listen, I mean, I drafted that just for this. You saw the emails. I talked about a whole bunch of topics.
Yeah.
I'm always happy. If you liked it enough, happy to come back and.
Yeah, we have a senior elective course called Professionalism and the Definition of Success, which I teach. It's a spring semester honors course for students. A lot of the stuff you're talking about, we talk about in that
Good,
course.
excellent. All right. Well, Frank, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Let's stay in touch,
Yeah.
okay?
I appreciate it.
Okay, we'll see you soon. Thanks again.
Thank you.